Merry meet. I'm Aislin. This is Ask Aislin. I'm here today to talk about the waning crescent moon and shadow work, one of my favorite topics of all. So if you're here with me live, you can go ahead and leave me comments or questions. I'll be sure to get to those at the end of the episode. Otherwise, I'm just going to dive right in. So we're currently in the waning crescent of the moon, the lunar cycle, and our visibility of the moon tonight is 29.2%. This is being recorded on Wednesday, the 19th of October, for anybody who's watching this later. And during this time of the waning crescent, we start to feel this pull to turn inward. Maybe work on some self-reflective work, deeper emotional work. As far as spell work goes during this time, this is all about banishings, cord cuttings. It's very good to do a cord cutting now, letting go of other people's energy, and releasings of any kind. Now, this energy of letting go, it will continue to be amplified up until the dark moon, which is the very peak of that energy. And the dark moon is the night right before the new moon, and it is a time of intense release. So these 72 hours right before the dark moon, those are called the balsamic moon hours. And those hours are also a time of very intense release, but then it peaks right there at that dark moon. Now, if we think about the idea of releasing, the body itself needs to release every month. And this isn't just the physical body, this is the emotional and energetic bodies as well. And even if you're not a woman or someone who bleeds, you can still appreciate this analogy of menstruation. So the uterus sheds its lining every month, and this is a rebirth of the entire system. Now, if that energy, that blood, is not released properly every month, there's stagnation, there's stuck energy in the system, and that's going to cause ill health in some way. Now, the same thing occurs in our energetic body, no matter what gender we are. There is this time of releasing every month. And it's important for this reason for us to be aware of the lunar cycle and the part of it we're in at any given time, because it gives us a clue as to what the body is doing, both physical body, energetic body, I shouldn't say both, the physical body, the energetic body, the emotional body, all the different bodies that we have that I'm going to talk about a little bit later. Now, shadow work itself is a process that we can use during all times, but especially during the waning moon. And it really goes hand in hand with this natural energy, this energy of releasing, of turning inward, of reflecting. Now, after a shadow work session, we may also find that we have a lot of extra stuff to let go of and release that we didn't even know was there. Stuck and stagnant energy from all of our bodies. And that is what we're going to talk about today. So the first thing we need to start with, though, is what is the shadow to begin with? So if you've been following me for a while, I've done a few episodes on shadow work before. If you're new to this, I definitely recommend go back and you can check some of those out. You can even search for topics within the group. If you're a member of Body, Mind, Witchcraft and you're watching it here in the group, you can search for topics. And I have all the videos tagged that are about shadow work. But I'm going to start, for those who are newer or those who just want a refresher, I'm going to start with a little bit about what the shadow is to begin with. So the shadow, contrary to popular opinion, is not something dark and evil. And shadow work is not about dark and black magic. So sometimes you have people come in and they think that's what this is about. That's really missing the point. It's not really what shadow work is about. Now, we all have a shadow. Whether we are aware of it or not, whether we want to believe it or not, we all have a shadow. And our shadow forms in two primary ways, and both of them are natural. So I always want to kind of reiterate that this is a natural process. If you know, it's nothing that you did wrong in your life to have this. We all have one. Now, two primary ways that the shadow is created is through roles that we took on at some part of our lives that we did not see to fulfillment. And a lot of this happens in early childhood. So the unfortunate part about the shadow is that most of it develops before we're even aware that a shadow exists. So there's kind of some unfairness in all of this. But this really is the path to spiritual evolution. So when it comes to anything that evolves us, it doesn't come without a cost and it doesn't come without work. So I guess that's the trade-off here. Now, these roles that we did not pursue, they get splintered off and they get put into our unconscious, compartmentalized into the shadow as an aspect of the shadow self. I always give this example of when I was very, very little. I don't even really remember much of these memories, but I was enrolled in ballet school and I was not, didn't really have the coordination to be a ballerina. And so there's clearly something, and I was only there for probably one day, and maybe not even a full lesson. I was there before I went home. And somewhere in my unconscious, that shadow aspect exists. And maybe that explains why later in my life I went on to become a yoga teacher, and I'm actually quite coordinated and flexible now. But you can see that's where some of our shadow aspects come from, are those early roles we tried on, different hats we put on that we didn't end up wearing. Now, another place that the shadow comes from is through personality traits that were shunned by either our society at large or our family or teachers or people who were around us at a very early age. Now, as I said, remember that the shadow forms very early before we even know that there is this possibility of having one. Now, the problem with the shadow is that it creates a dichotomy in our mind, and it splinters and splits things off into good, bad, right, wrong. And the reality is that in nature and in the universe, there isn't this dichotomy of evil and bad and good and right and wrong. I mean, morally, there are things that we know are morally better than others, but nature doesn't have that dichotomy. So when we perceive this dichotomy within ourselves, this causes us a tremendous amount of stress. Now, some of this stress is felt consciously, though we usually don't even really know where it's coming from, but most of the stress is unconscious. And it takes a ton of energy to suppress the shadow, to keep it down in underneath in the unconscious. Now, your ego wants to suppress it because it doesn't want all of this negative things it perceives to boil up to the surface. But if it's taken us so much energy to keep these parts stifled and below in our unconscious, what could we be doing with that energy instead? Can you imagine if we could use all that energy for our spiritual evolution, for our emotional growth and advancement? Just imagine our potential, right? So this is why shadow work is so important. Now, we hide the shadow by creating a mask. So we all wear this mask called the persona. This is our outward projection of the self. It's a likable personality that we put on around others, and it hides our insecurities. But if we want to be truly whole, we need to face that unconscious, and we need to face that shadow. So during our shadow work, we learn how to remove the mask, and we see what lies beneath so that we can integrate that. Now, our society says, just be a good person, think positive. You've heard people say that, just think positive and everything will be okay. Spread love and light. And don't get me wrong at all, I'm all about all of those things. This is Body, Mind, Witchcraft for a reason. We're all about light and love and energy work. But at the same time, all of that good stuff doesn't heal us. So just being positive isn't going to heal us. Really, all it's doing is it's putting a Band-Aid over the surface so that we don't actually go deep down and dig deep down and see what's really there. So we can't just wish our shadow away by being positive and being good people. We need to face it. Now, our triggers are our biggest teachers. And so when we're triggered, it's actually a gift from the universe. The universe is giving you a gift when you are triggered. And that's kind of hard to swallow sometimes. We think our triggers, those are all the things that make us feel bad. And while that's true in the moment, you're actually being given this gift. It's something that you're ready to see. It's something that you're ready to transcend if you want, if you want to. Now, the vast majority of us are never going to go there. We're never going to go there. We're just going to stay up here in the conscious level. We're going to remain triggered. We're going to think that everything that's going on around us is happening to us, that those people around us are, doing things to us. And even if we realize that we play a part and it's not about the other, most people really never go this deep. But those of you who are here, I know that you're here because you want to go a little bit deeper. You want to dig a little deeper. And in order to do that, we need to be able to turn the mirror back around on ourselves. And until we do that, we're beholden to the shadow. So I just want to mention or tell you a little bit about my own journey, just briefly. Some of you have heard some of this, but I went through some very traumatic events a few years ago. I had a surgery that saved my life. I was very, very close to death at the time. And as I was coming out and recovering from the emotional component of this, it was for an ectopic pregnancy, so I'd actually lost a baby during it as well. And as I was coming through this, I began doing some really deep and intense shadow work. Now, before that, I had dabbled in shadow work for 20 some years. I was a psychology major. I have a master's degree in counseling psychology. I've been studying witchcraft and esoteric arts for like years and years and years. So I've been dabbling in this for a long time. But when I began that intensive shadow work, I did so to heal myself emotionally, because that's what shadow work's supposed to be about, at least when you read about it in a non-pagan, non-witchcraft perspective. But what was very interesting to me is that when I got in and I did that work, it helped. It helped me truly, and I would not be here as the person that I am today without it. But when I stepped into my circle afterwards to lead circles for other people and to do my own spiritual work, I was blown away by the spiritual advancement that I had made in that time that I was doing the shadow work. I didn't know it. It was like an unexpected gift. So this made me realize that shadow work is actually one of the keys to advancing ourselves spiritually, to increasing our magical abilities, our potential, to increasing our intuition. My intuition also up-leveled significantly, exponentially, I would say. So before I go in further, I wanted to tell you that story, and I want to tell you some of the benefits of working with shadow work, working with the shadow. So there are the emotional benefits, recovering from trauma. It helps us get in and recover from our trauma, face things that were repressed. It helps us feel less alone. It helps us deepen our intuition, like I mentioned. We can enhance our magical abilities through this. That was my unexpected finding. We find more wholeness. That's what most people say. That's kind of the main benefit, is you're integrating the personality and the self, so you become more of a whole person, feeling more complete. We maximize our healing and our self-healing. That's also kind of that was an unexpected finding for me. I was able to up-level my own ability to heal myself, and then that helped me also heal others in a more profound way, more optimal way. Like I said, we heal our trauma, our emotional wounds. We can understand our underlying emotions. That's really important too. That gives us power. And I'm going to talk about that at the end a little bit more. We're not as affected by other people's negativity and negative energy. So when that kind of comes into our field, we understand all the motivations. We understand our triggers and our role in it. And so we're able to kind of choose whether or not we're affected by negative energy around us. And like I said, we up-level our spiritual practice and alchemize the soul. And for most of those of you who are here, that's oftentimes what spiritual path is about. We're trying to up-level. We're trying to, maximize our potential, get closer to the divine. And so shadow work is just, I can't talk enough about how great it is when it comes to all of these things. So I do want to talk about how my approach to shadow work is a little bit different than perhaps coming from just a psychological perspective. So I have a psychological background, but I also have that spiritual background. I've been a Wiccan high priestess for a decade, over a decade. I've actually had my own tradition for over a decade. And I also am a yoga teacher with an advanced degree in that, a certified meditation teacher. So I just come about this from a kind of an Eastern meets Western perspective. Now, shadow work itself, it helps remove all of our emotional blockages. But energy work helps remove our energetic blockages. And when we marry these two together, this is where the up-leveling comes. So don't get me wrong, if you were to go and do some shadow work from a more traditional teacher, then you're definitely going to evolve emotionally, but you may not evolve quite as much when it comes to your intuition, your magical abilities, because of the energy component here. So like I said, most of the teachers, they don't address the energetic body at all. But to me, this combination is how we truly can up-level our spiritual practices. Now, in order to understand why the energetic body is so important when it comes to shadow work, is we need to look at the Panchamaya kosha system. So this is a way of looking at our different bodies. So I mentioned earlier we have more than one body, and we're totally aware here in a group like this, following a page like mine, people know it's not just your body and your mind being separated. So we're already aware of that. We know there's a body, we know that there's a mind, we know that there's a spirit, and we're working on all three of those. But there's actually more than that. We have more bodies than that. And this is where looking at the subtle bodies is really helpful. So briefly, I'm going to get into this. This could be a whole class on its own. But the Panchamaya kosha system, it comes from the tantric system, from Ayurveda, Indian medicine. And it breaks our subtle bodies down into different layers. And when we understand how we move through them, we start to understand that what we're doing and how it affects us at different energetic levels. So we start with the Annamaya kosha. Now the Annamaya kosha is literally translates to food sheath. So when you hear someone say you are what you eat, there is absolute truth in that, because everything you put into your mouth eventually breaks down into molecules that are used to build your body. So when your skin cells need to be regenerated, your hair, all the cells of your body need to be regenerated, they're literally being regenerated through food. And if you think about us as well, when we die and we leave this plane, we leave behind the Annamaya kosha, and we become food for something else, right, as we decompose as well. Now, that physical body is made of the 5 elements. This is earth, water, fire, air, and in Ayurvedic and Indian medicine, this 5th element is called ether. In a more witchcraft perspective, we would probably call this spirit or akasha, which is actually the word that comes from Ayurveda. A lot of people don't know that. But that is what this physical body is composed of. Now, most people just kind of spend their time in the Annamaya kosha, never really going much deeper. But people like us, we like to go deeper. So the next body is the Pranamaya kosha, and this is our energetic body. It literally translates to the pranic sheath. Prana is energy. In other systems, we might call this chi or mana, or there's different words for it. You know, it's life force. Now, this is where our chakras and our nadis, our energetic channels are. This is where all of our energy is flowing through the body. This particular body, the Pranamaya kosha, is what we access when we do breath work, energy work, yoga, meditation, things like that. Meditation actually takes us a little bit deeper into the 3rd body, which is the Manomaya kosha. Now, this is the mental and the emotional body. It's completely fluctuating. So if you think about it, your emotions and your thoughts, they're not actually real. They're not the true essence of you. They shift and they come and they go. We have like thousands and thousands and thousands of thoughts and emotions a day. Most of these thoughts we have are either negative, irrelevant, or not productive. And so you can kind of see how this body is not reality, though a lot of people spend a lot of time here thinking that it is. Now, we're going to talk in a minute, because these are the kind of layers that we want to access when we're doing shadow work. But we really want to get deeper then eventually is into the Vijnanamaya kosha, which is our intellect. This is where our intuition is. We might even say this begins to be like our true self, our higher self. This is really who we are. When we remove the irrelevant thoughts and the fluctuating emotions, when we take all that away, this is really the essence of who we are. That's what we want to tap into. And then we finally have the Anandamaya kosha, which is the bliss body. It sounds very close to the first one, which is Annamaya kosha. This is Ananda. Ananda means bliss. And this is the soul. This is the connection to the divine. Now, it is hard to access the subtle bodies without going through the ones below them first. So what this means is if you want to access the higher self, which is all the way up at the fourth level, you can do that, no doubt. You can definitely access the higher self, but it's easier and it's more productive if we can access it through going through the lower levels first. Now the Manomaya kosha, that's the emotional and the mental body, that's where our shadow work takes place. And it's easier to get there if we will work with the energy body first, the Pranamaya kosha. So, like I said earlier, most people who do shadow work don't realize this, and that's what I really advocate for with my students and anybody who's learning from me, is we do energy work as well, because it helps us get into the emotional body so we can actually do the real work. And then from there, we start to remove all those blockages from all those lower levels, and that helps us access the higher self, and then eventually getting closer to the divine. So I'm going to shift gears now and talk about techniques to do shadow work. So again, this is, a whole course. I have a whole membership on this. I'll talk about that a little bit at the end if you're not already a member. But I wanted to talk about priming the pump. So priming the pump, and I want to talk about the difference between priming the pump and prompting a shadow work session. So priming the pump are practices that we can use, that we can do, that will induce a shadow work session. Now, shadow work session itself is, it's a little hard to describe because it's one of those experiential things where you really have to experience it to understand it. Now, once you have one, you'll totally get it, you totally know, and I'm going to give an example of one of my own at the end that will probably shed some light on what it feels like and what it looks like. But just know a shadow work session is a very internal experience. It's very different for all people, and it's in your mind, and through your mind you work through, and your emotions, you work through a bunch of things that you're eventually able to come to a realization about something concerning yourself. Now, priming the pump is what we do in order to try to induce these sessions. And if we do this, we do it a lot, and we do these exercises and we prime the pump, we're more likely to drop into a spontaneous shadow work session or even a prompted one, which I'll get to as well. Now, priming the pump is really good during the waxing half of the lunar cycle. So pretty much we're working on this all the time, but we're doing different things at different parts of the cycle. So these are active practices, and some of them don't seem like they have anything to do with shadow work. And so at times it can be a little confusing, like why would we do this if we're trying to get in and do shadow work and work emotionally? But trust me, this stuff works. This is how I did it myself. Now, active practices like this would include activating breath work. There's different breaths that you can do that will move tremendous amounts of energy through the body very quickly, and they break away stagnant and stuck energy, which gets everything moving more optimally. Kundalini energy exercises, this is where there's sometimes combined breath, sometimes it's just a movement, but it's a repetitive movement that's done quickly. And again, it breaks up energetic blockages in the energy body. We can do flow style yoga, is very good during that time, especially if it's yoga that is specifically designed to work with the chakras and the energy centers of the body. Hiking, dancing, spontaneous movement, anything that you can do to shake things up and get your energy moving, this is called priming the pump. So we want to be doing that during the waxing half of the cycle, And what we do there is we, like I mentioned, we move large amounts of energy through the body very, very quickly, and it dissolves our blockages in the pranic and the energetic body. So remember when I talked about the 5 subtle bodies, when we are able to kind of dissolve the blockages in the energetic body, the second level, then we're more easily able to move into the emotions and into the intellect and the levels that are above it. Now, the second half of the cycle, the waning moon, we want to do prompting. So during this, these are practices that are, they'll feel a lot more receptive. So those earlier practices during the waxing moon, they feel really activating, right? And their point is to move lots of energy. During prompting, we want to be open and receptive to receiving, and we want to access the unconscious. So these practices look a lot different. So here would be an example. One is called self-realization. Carl Jung, who many people call the godfather of shadow work, he called this active imagination. This is often helpful with the use of a shadow work prompt. So what this looks like I said, is you kind of go internally and you are reflecting on things. Now, if you do all these practices and you really immerse yourself in shadow work and you get good at it, you don't necessarily need the prompts after a while. Things will just kind of bubble up to the surface during an active imagination session. But for most people, I would recommend using some kind of a prompt. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. I share them in my membership. I sometimes share them here in Body, Mind, Witchcraft as well. The most classic prompt is the most classic one for a reason, because it helps so many people. And this prompt is, who irks or annoys you the most? So when you can kind of think about that, then you are often able to then go a little bit deeper. You'll be able to realize what lies underneath it, and it's just a way to access the shadow self. Now, another practice that is really useful during the waning half of the lunar cycle is yin yoga. Now, this is very different from a flow style yoga. Yin yoga is long holds, very, very long holds. Most of the time, you're not even getting up off the mat. You're laying on the floor, you're sitting, and you're holding these poses for an extremely long amount of time. Now, what happens is that when we do that, we move down through that physical body and we move down into the energetic body. It starts to remove the blockages there, and then from there, it helps us move down into the emotional body. So what you find when you do yin yoga is at first, you're like in the physical body, and so you're kind of moving around, and then you feel yourself kind of drop down into the energetic body, and your breathing becomes more regulated, you become more relaxed immediately. And some people just kind of stop there. Yin yoga does not have to be used for shadow work. It's great for just getting rid of energetic blocks in the body. But if you stay in the pose long enough and you've primed your pump during the waxing half of the cycle, you will often then drop down into the emotional body, and all these things start bubbling up that you have not thought about ever or haven't thought about in a long time, and you start to make these connections and you actually start to do shadow work here. Many shadow work sessions can be induced this way. I've induced many of my own this way. And another benefit of yin yoga is the added benefit of flexibility. So while yoga is good, just regular yoga is good at building strength, yin yoga is really what takes your flexibility to a new place. And not only that, but yin yoga is very cathartic, and you can often get a big emotional release, even if you're not doing shadow work. So like before I was even pairing yin yoga with shadow work, I would just get these huge emotional cathartic releases where I would just start crying, and it would feel so good to let go of all those emotions. Now, if you've never done yin yoga, I highly encourage you to find some videos on YouTube. There's a lot of great ones out there. I'm actually going to put a video into the group tomorrow that's going to be a yin yoga practice. And if you're one of my members in our shadow work membership, we're going to get one next month, a special extra one for shadow work. Now, another way to prompt shadow work is through Yoga Nidra. This, again, could be its own class. Yoga Nidra is a very special type of meditation, despite the fact that it has the word yoga. Yoga itself doesn't mean moving, though a lot of people in the West think that's what it means because we've kind of brought we've brought asana practice, which is our flow style yoga, to the West. And so a lot of people equate the word yoga with movement, but yoga is actually a way to yoke the soul. That's where the word actually comes from. Yin yoga is a special type of meditation where you can advance your emotional and spiritual evolution very quickly. So the person who taught it to me, she had done it for years. She had learned it from someone, and she says that it's like doing 25 years of therapy like in a couple of months. So it's really crazy, crazy work. Another way that you can prompt during the waning moon is through working with archetypes. So archetypes are symbolic representations of various things. When we're working with them with the shadow self, we're usually working with the personality-based archetypes. We all have about 12 archetypes, give or take a few, that we kind of have during this incarnation, and we also try different ones on at different times. All of these archetypes, they have both light and shadow aspects to them. So if you learn what your archetypes are for your own incarnation in this life, you can then explore the shadow side of those, and that can help you induce a shadow work session as well. And then there is also inner child work. Inner child work's really great because, remember, the shadow forms very early in life before we even know it exists. And so working with the inner child can also be really helpful. Those could all be their own class. So, but I just wanted to mention those as ways that we can prompt during the waning moon. Now, if we prime the pump, where we do our energy exercises, and we prompt ourselves through some of those exercises during the waning moon that I talked about, like using shadow work prompts, doing yin yoga, maybe working with archetypes and the inner child, we're more likely to have shadow work sessions. And sometimes they'll even come out of nowhere where we're not even prompting. With these I call spontaneous shadow working sessions, where you didn't even plan on it and all of a sudden you're in one. But a lot of the time, especially when we're starting out, most of what we're doing is prompted, and that's okay. Now, during a shadow work session, you may feel that you, afterwards, that you are more open to universal energy. It can feel like you receive cosmic downloads. All of a sudden, you understand reality in a way that you hadn't understood before, or you understand an aspect of yourself that exists in you, and you understand why it exists there. And this is where we really start to access our higher self, and we start to up-level ourselves spiritually. So I wanted to give you a brief example of one of my own shadow work sessions that I feel comfortable sharing. And this one, and it will give you kind of an idea of what these look like, because a lot of people come to me and they're like, I'm not even really sure, am I doing it? How do I know I'm doing it, right? So without getting into the whole backstory, a year ago, back in August of last year, I was working very hard to start my business. I had a lot of things on my plate, to the point that my plate was as full as my plate could be, and there wasn't room for anything more. And then a cat showed up in our backyard, and it quickly became apparent that she was pregnant. And she had also called along with her two kittens who must have come from a previous litter. Our neighborhood where we bought our house right before the pandemic is known for having a very large feral cat problem. And so these cats showed up, and then I kind of denied it for a while. Maybe she's not pregnant, because we were feeding her and she was finally getting food, and maybe she's not pregnant. And it became very apparent that she was. And I'm the kind of person, I'm a cat lover. You'll probably see cats wandering in and out of here. We have 5 here right now. And so it wasn't something that I could ignore. And it wasn't something I could just call like the local shelters because I know it happens in those places. So I began calling a bunch of people to see if I could get some help, like someone perhaps who would foster her and the kittens. And it was August of last year, like I said, and this is kitten season, and no one would help me. Most people laughed at me. Most people blamed me on the phone as though it was something I was doing and not just, I was trying to help the situation. And I finally found this one girl on Nextdoor. She said she was willing to help me. And despite the fact that I saw some things, some red flags in her posts and things, I didn't have anybody else who could help me. You know, the only other people who would even talk to me told me to take them to the shelters, told me to abort the kittens. It was just things I wasn't going to be able to do. And so this girl said she would help. And a long story short, we ended up catching the pregnant cat, and we caught one of the kittens. By then, the second kitten had disappeared. We don't really know where it went, but we caught the second kitten, and we took them to the girl's house. And she said that she would foster them. And the agreement was always that we would take the pregnant cat back. We were going to adopt her afterwards, and the girl was going to find a home for all the kittens, and she was going to find a home for the kitten that we gave her to. So the unborn kittens and the one that was with her. So anyway, I don't want to get into the whole story, but eventually the fostering situation did not work out. The kitten that we caught ended up back on our property, spayed, or she was spayed, and she was tagged, and she was dropped off here as not being a kitten who could be adopted. We eventually took her in. We brought the mother back. The mother was in terrible condition when she got here. I've never seen a cat that looked so bad. It looked worse than cats that I've seen who were dying of cancer. I don't know what would happened over there during that time. But we nurtured her. We brought the cat back in here, and long story short, it took us some time, but they integrated back into our home, and now we have 5 cats. So where I'm going with this is, to this day, whenever I see, her name is Yvonne, the girl's name is Yvonne, whenever I see her post on social media, I become very triggered by her posts. Now, obviously, there's a conscious reason. You know, the cat was very malnourished when she came back. A lot of things were going on, you know, so I understand that from a conscious level. But when I began to explore the situation at a more unconscious level, I induced a shadow work session to work through why one of her posts triggered me as much as it did. And you want to ask yourself when you're in here, what does it say about me? What is going on underneath the surface? So there's this, like I said, there's the obvious conscious reason to be triggered by it, but what else is going on? Because remember, the triggers are the gifts from the universe. So if we choose to accept the gift, then it's our responsibility to look at it more deeply and figure out, what could I learn about myself from this? So as I peeled away all these layers, and I often do this through like a yin yoga, like I'm in a yin yoga pose while I'm doing this, and I'm peeling away all the layers in my mind, I realized that I had terrible, terrible guilt over giving the cats to her in the first place, especially because there were these red flags that I kind of sensed before it all happened. And you know, and also giving away the kitten. Her name is Corey. She's an orange kitten. You'll see her sometimes here. But giving her away when clearly she wanted to be with me. That's why it didn't work out in the fostering situation. She was meant to be mine. So I just had like so much guilt. And even though I did so much to help, tried to help the situation, and I nurtured the cats when they came back, I still had overwhelming guilt over it all. So here's how this helps, though, is that when I realized this, I realized that the stress of seeing her posts, Yvonne's posts, was about Yvonne, but it was also about me. It was also about my own guilt. You know, she's still an irresponsible person. She really has no business running a rescue foster center, whatever she's doing. But that part is not taken away. So just so you know, we're not taking the responsibility away from whatever those other people are doing out there that trigger us. But when I understand the depth of why I'm triggered, this is the game changer. Because what I start to understand what it says about me, I now have the choice of whether to be triggered by her or not, to be affected by her or not. And this is where we get our power. Because when I realize that I have control over my own triggers, whether I'm triggered or not, I have a choice, then I gain back some of my power. Now, before I had done any of these sessions or this work on this one issue, I could not control it. I would see her things and my blood would boil, and because it was all motivated by the unconscious. But when I turned the mirror back around on myself, which is what shadow work is all about, then I got to choose whether or not I would be affected by it. And I have the freedom to choose whether or not she affects me. So we do this over and over and over again. This is not a one-time stop, a one-time thing. We do this over and over and over and over again, cycle after cycle after cycle. We receive these gifts from the universe in the form of triggers. We do our priming the pump exercises during the waxing moon. We do our prompting exercises during the waning moon. This is the key to our integration. This is the key to shadow work. This is the goal of shadow work. This is how it all works. And it leads eventually to our spiritual and emotional evolution, which is what we all want. And eventually leads to greater connection to the higher self. This is something I've realized more recently as well. So when I talk about those cosmic downloads, just large amounts of information coming in, where you understand how things work, how you work, this is where we connect to the higher self. We just know things, and our intuition is exponentially heightened. So before I end, I wanted to mention too that there is, as witches, we also can add on ritual. Ritual is something that most shadow work teachers don't really teach a lot of, but we're used to working with the gods, we're used to working with the elements and the energy, so we can add in these awesome rituals that will help accentuate what's going on with our shadow work. So dark moon releasing rituals are really great to follow up these shadow work sessions. So if you kind of have a shadow work session in the waning moon, then you can add in a ritual in the balsamic moon. Remember that phase is a 72 hours right before the new moon, and then that final day, that dark moon day right before the new moon, that's the most heightened energy of release. We can then help ourselves release all that stuff that comes up during the shadow work sessions. And through all of this, we become more whole. All those benefits I talked about earlier, they all manifest in our lives over many cycles of this process. So I wanted to mention that I do have a shadow work and energy work membership. It's closed right now. We keep the doors closed. We had a launch a couple months ago. We took in our founding members. They're awesome, and we are doing some awesome work with them. And all together, this weekend, we're actually going to meet Anana in a descent into the underworld. Last month, we worked with Kali, and we burned away our fears and some of our energetic blockages. And there are workshops, and there are alignment practices. So these are all those kind of the priming the pump practices I talked about. So we will be reopening our doors very briefly at the very end of November. We're going to let in just a small number of people again. So if you're interested and you're not already a member, definitely send me a message or comment on any of our posts and let me know. And that way I'll make sure that you hear about this first before we open the doors. We're going to let people actually sign up before we even open the doors, because we do have a limited number of spots. And I also wanted to mention that I have a Samhain ritual coming up Friday, November 4th, and this is going to be in union with my coven. So the maiden of our coven, Beth, she's going to be joining me again like she did at Mabon. This is a ritual to honor our ancestors and our dearly departed loved ones and pets, and it's going to be a dark and cathartic Samhain ritual. So I hope that you can attend. I think we're running it through Eventbrite again, but you can get in for just $1 donation for a ticket. So just look for posts about that soon, and there's a lot of exciting things coming up as well after that. All right, I don't see any questions, so I'm going to sign off. If you are watching this somewhere else and you're not already a member of our group, Body, Mind, Witchcraft, I highly recommend you join us here. And we have an awesome community of almost, I think, over 1,000 members now. And if you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate. Reach out to me, and I'll be sure to include them in next week's episode. All right, till then, blessed be.